Welcome back to all the participants and also to Sebastian sir to the international workshop on designing digitally robust research libraries for the 21st century, organized by Geo Institute in collaboration with AICTE between 25th April to 29th April 2022. We will now begin with the last technical session of the day and the 8th technical session of the workshop on the topic ILS implementation FOLIO, the future of libraries is open, by Mr. Sebastian Hammer, who is the co-founder and president of Index Data, New Hampshire, US. Mr. Sebastian is a co-founder of Index Data, a software company based in Denmark and US and specializing in library software and community-centered innovation and product development. He has worked with library technology for 30 years, collaborating with libraries, consortia, and service providers around the world. Index Data was a founding member of the FOLIO and Reshare communities, and Mr. Sebastian served a central role in shaping both the technical designs and the community organizations for these international collaborations. In prior years, Mr. Sebastian designed software tools that have been adopted by numerous projects and organizations worldwide. He believes that community ownership of technology is a critical tool for libraries as they work to shape their future in the face of a rapidly changing landscape. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, everybody, for making me part of your conversation. I stand between you, I understand, and dinner and rest after a long day. But I hope that you will find this conversation interesting and inspiring in the same way that it's been deeply inspiring and exciting for me to be part of over the past now more than 7 years. So I'm going to share my screen, hopefully. So I won't say, and I'm assuming that people are seeing my screen.
Yeah. Please put it in the slide mode.
Here we go. So I can't add too much to my story, except to say that, as was just said, I've worked in libraries for my entire adult life. Basically, I started while still in college and never moved on from working with technology in libraries. I came to libraries as a software developer and a computer scientist first. And over the years, my interest and my focus has in many ways shifted from thinking about pure software development to thinking about the life cycle of technology and the ways that technology interplay with the community around it. And I have worked on dozens, if not hundreds, of projects in collaboration with individual libraries, with library consortia, with national libraries and academic libraries, as well as working with most of the big software companies that still serve libraries today. So I've had an opportunity over the years to watch the way that people attempt to build software that has an impact, that has served their communities well, that is successful commercially, and that lasts a long time. And I guess what has struck me is how hard it is to do that, and how many times people with great resources and great intentions get it wrong. I've been part of building software that has lived for decades and evolved over time and been really successful. And I've been part of really well-meaning serious projects that have ultimately gone nowhere. And I'm sure that we've all seen that happen, both within libraries and outside of libraries, that the best intentions and the most money in the world cannot really guarantee that a software project or any technology project is successful. So what is the magic sauce, so to speak? What is it that distinguishes the successful software project from the unsuccessful one, other than blind luck? And certainly that can play a role as well. And as I've thought about this over the years, I have come to think about and kind of looked at approaches to innovation and to ideation. And I've thought about all the many ways that when we set out to build something that is new and exciting, we very often end up recreating something that we've all seen before, something that we're familiar with. It's very hard to break out of the boxes that we all live within based on our prior experience. It's hard to innovate, in short. And what I've come to feel is that the real key to true innovation and to looking forward is to have an effective dialogue between your strategic vision and leadership, your understanding of the challenges that you're facing, just not just today, but the larger trends that are affecting your space, and the development of technology, the design of technology, and the implementation of technology. That's the goal. That's the space, the mental space where real innovation can take place. But in actual fact, we do a lot of things in how we organize ourselves into teams, into companies, into organizations that stand in the way of that dialogue. We very often end up sitting in our local boxes, and the developers are frustrated because they don't know what to build. They don't understand what to build to really have an impact. And strategic leadership can feel frustrated and concerned because they are faced with numerous challenges and they don't know how to make technology move in the direction needed to face those challenges. And that can lead to situations that are frightening, that feel disenfranchising, where change feels like something that is happening to you rather than something that you have control over. But you feel like you're not in the driver's seat if you don't get to control the direction of the technology that you desperately need to make your business work. But when you break down those silos, innovation can really flourish and you can have new kinds of conversations. And these ideas on my part have really grown out of a long history of developing and releasing software under open source licenses and sharing the work that I did with other people. And this was something that we did at Index Data from the very beginning, really because we had no alternative, because we were a tiny company of 2-3 people and we didn't have a sales staff. So we thought sharing our software was a way to get it out there and to get people engaging with it. And that led to us doing projects together with other people. And what's really struck me over the years is the way that open source software can help break down those silos between organizations, where the normal procurement of technology involves requests for proposals and negotiations of contracts. Open source collaborations can be much freer and much more open. So, what are some of those challenges that we might wish to deal with? And these are examples of the types of concerns that I encounter in my work and conversations with library leaders. And some of these may have a Western or an American focus. Some of them I would suspect are more universal. There may be other trends or challenges that are facing your communities and your environment, your patrons and users. So take these as kind of ideas of the types of conversations that have been taking place in the spaces where I've tended to work. A big issue in the US, and that probably is a very American issue, is that the cost of higher education has grown to the point where it's not sustainable for many families to send their children to the schools that they'd like to. But higher education universities are also pressed on the costs of materials and other resources. There's an increasing amount of material out there produced that has to be made available to scholars and students, and the cost of access to those materials keep growing up while funding is cut for academic libraries in many institutions year over year. Student expectations, meanwhile, are evolving rapidly as generations are coming up that have grown up with access to the internet, that have come to expect instant gratification from a Google search, which is very different than the slow, methodical approach needed to come to understand a field of scholarly research. How do you promote and support information literacy in that landscape? We are faced with new formats, new types of delivery methods. The whole field of scholarly communication is seen as evolving at the moment under pressure from the movement towards open access, under pressure from new ways of communicating and organizing collaboration. In many ways, what was maybe 20 years ago a landscape of information scarcity, where providing access to information was the most important role of libraries, we've moved to a landscape where there's a glut of information, where there's even worse, there's a glut of misinformation in many cases, where it sometimes feels like truth and facts themselves are under attack. Libraries are also faced with competition from other service providers, both outside of libraries. Again, Google is very often where students will start their search for information, irrespective of what types of tools the library might make available. But also competition from the various suppliers of content that libraries have been relying on. We're seeing a move towards publishers and others looking to make information available to scholars and students more directly, in some cases disintermediating libraries. So what is the future role of the academic library? How does the library claim a role? How does the library facilitate and support scholarly communication? Might the library be able to engage further in the management of research data and research processes, supporting education outcomes? How can the library move against or provide a counterpoint to the commercial interests that are looking to own these spaces increasingly? And again, how can we deal with open access? How do we navigate that space, and how do we face the emergence of these very large all-in-one research platforms that are being built by companies like Elsevier, like Clarivate, and that are, in a sense, looking to try to become kind of the Facebooks and the all-in-one container and owners of research communication and scholarly work. How do we do that? And how do we do it in particularly in the context of a landscape of library technology that up until 5 years ago was really increasingly dominated by a very small and shrinking number of companies? Library technology has always been faced with the challenge that the migration to a new library management system is a expensive, complex process for a library that's been using a given system for a long time. Typically, a library, once they've adopted the system, will stay with that system for 10, 15, even more years. That can tend to make innovation more difficult. But worse than that, we have watched just this incredibly rapid, massive consolidation of library technology across different vendors, where vendors have been bought and sold, and increasingly the ownership of what used to be founder-operated companies collaborating closely with libraries, these companies are now owned by private equity firms or by the very content providers that are looking to sell content to libraries or directly to researchers. That's created a landscape where, as I mentioned, many strategists and leaders feel increasingly powerless. They feel disenfranchised, or like they lack agency in deciding the direction of technology. There's also been a move from locally managed library systems to cloud-hosted platforms, which from an efficiency perspective is great. It's the right way to operate things from a technical perspective. But it has led to the emergence of platforms and to an intense pressure on companies to try to own the largest slice of the library technology market on their platform, with Ex Libris now unquestionably dominating the field for academic libraries, to the point where a few years ago it was really seen that it was perceived that there was really no answer. So what happens if libraries are outsourcing a lot of operations, a lot of functionality, and the mechanisms needed to access and use and repurpose and innovate based on their collections and their data, all of that becomes outsourced to these companies that are ultimately owned increasingly by content providers. Libraries are essentially losing control of their own technology roadmap. They become tenants in somebody else's system. They become disenfranchised in a sense. That was essentially the background and the context that eventually led to the formation of the FOLIO project, a sense of real urgency and desperation, not just on the part of libraries that felt like they were losing control, but also of EBSCO as one of the main competitors to ProQuest, one of the other content providers that had bought Alma and Ex Libris. Felt like that the whole kind of library community was getting painted into a corner where the community was rapidly losing control over their data, their technology, and their ability to innovate. Not to say that Ex Libris is a bad company or dangerous company, or that they don't mean well, but I think fundamentally everybody feels that having a single organization with a few people deciding the strategic direction of library technology is not enough. There needs to be a conversation, as you're having here at this event. There needs to be a marketplace of ideas informing the direction of technology, not just a single person sitting in a room somewhere. So all of this gave rise to what was the founding mission behind FOLIO. And the most profound aspect of it can be captured by this one line. FOLIO was envisaged as a true open platform owned by its community of stakeholders. These aspects, if you grasp them, really tell you everything that informed the vision and the architecture behind the FOLIO project. A true open platform owned by its community of stakeholders. What we're trying to do, in a sense, is to take all the things that are good about platforms, the ability to build off a common core, to innovate by gradually expanding and playing with it in an environment where different systems can talk together, can share data, but have that platform, that infrastructure owned by all of us, not by a single company. So an open platform owned by its community of stakeholders. We wanted it to be a true platform where the term platform is often abused to mean a product of any kind. But what we envisaged was a platform that truly could grow and expand and evolve to meet changing needs and to provide a kind of playground for experimentation and for innovation and for exploration. We took a lot of our inspiration from the ways that smartphones have revolutionized the way that technology is built and systems adapt, right? So with the smartphone, you start from a tool that doesn't by itself do anything, but it has an app store that allows anyone to customize it to a degree that nobody had ever seen before, right? You can go into the App Store and you can truly make that smartphone your own in terms of what you need from work, from entertainment, for communication. But it's also a platform that allows endless innovation in an open marketplace, where anyone can come in and build functionality that draws on and extends what the platform itself can do, but also what all these other apps can do. Every time somebody adds to the platform becomes richer. The big difference, again, because the platform is owned by its community of stakeholders, is that the riches, the equity doesn't flow to a single company, it doesn't flow to an Apple. It flows to everybody that owns the platform, and it gives all of us more power and more capabilities. We want to invite everybody to participate and to be really open-ended in how people participate in the way that the platform evolves and grows over time. Again, inspired by this notion of apps working together in an open system, we wanted the community around the platform to grow into something that many different types of organizations might come to, and they might participate in many different ways. They might sit in committees and discuss a shared vision and roadmap, or they might come in from the sides and use the platform for something entirely different that nobody had imagined. A key part of the vision behind FOLIO was this notion that we wanted it to surprise us as the architects. We wanted people to come to it and to use it for things that we'd never even imagined. Because truly, if we as a community are going to face the types of challenges that libraries and our communities, our worlds are facing, we need a marketplace of ideas. There isn't a single solution. We need lots and lots of different solutions to play off each other and to inspire each other. And that was a big part of the vision behind this. So again, community ownership means that the roadmap is guided by many voices, not just by one, and that there are many different ways to participate. And those stakeholders are libraries, they're service providers, commercial companies, consortia, they're individual developers. Anyone can come to the table. And that has been really central aspects of the vision behind FOLIO. So the original stakeholders, the founders that came to the table, was a really interesting cross-section of different entities, right? So we had a group of academic libraries, the open library environment, that had been thinking about and experimenting with new approaches to library technology for many years before FOLIO had started, but had kind of hit a wall in terms of what they could do without help. And then EBSCO came to the table, very much reacting again to the way that Ex Libris had come to dominate the marketplace, from a concern that Ex Libris might inadvertently even kind of close off the marketplace for access from other entities, might limit competition, might limit innovation. And then Little Index Data, my tiny company, came to the table because we had this long history building open source technology. We had a real vision that had informed us in terms of the power of open source software to break down boundaries. We had a real interest in innovation and a passion for standards and for modular systems. And it also happened that we had worked in the past with EBSCO, providing services to them to feed into to their products. And we had worked with many of the larger academic libraries in the US on many different kinds of projects over the years. So we were friends and parts of the circle. But mostly what we brought was a depth of experience and insight in the creation of open technologies. So our role in the project became, while the academic libraries provided depth of subject matter expertise and volunteers and individuals to take on community leadership roles and to help articulate the requirements to participate in design EBSCO provided funding and project management and architects and others, and over time, increasingly developers as well. Our role initially in the project was to lay out an architecture for something that could become the foundation of the type of ecosystem that we were envisaging together. So we spent months interviewing librarians, interviewing developers in the library community, speaking to leaders at EBSCO and at large academic libraries and mid-sized academic libraries, thinking about the challenges and thinking about what might be required from a system to hold all of these frustrations that people had, all of these concerns, and to challenge them into, or to channel them into a new direction. I don't mind saying that was a daunting proposition, and we felt very concerned for the first year or two about whether what we were trying to do was possible and whether we had the skills and the experience to do it. We were very much fueled by sort of a sense of the responsibility to get this right, because it felt like so much was riding on this. But I like to think that we have succeeded up to this point. FOLIO is now in production. It is running in more than 50 libraries, as I recall, at the last count. And there are dozens more that are in the process of migrating. Index Data has transitioned into being both a developer within the ecosystem of FOLIO and also an independent service provider. So we work in particular with academic libraries that have and consortia that have a strategic mission, that are interested in pushing the boundaries of what library technology can do. And we really thrive and continue to thrive in that space where technology grows and evolves and people get around the table to think about and get excited about what technology can do in the future. So I want to take a break here and show you guys a little bit about what FOLIO is like, both to give you a sense for those of you that don't spend time every day working in library management, of what a library management system or a library service platform is and can do, but also to kind of point out some of the ways that we have tried to realize the vision of an open platform and some of the new developments and innovations that have come out of that platform. So I will attempt, if you'll bear with me, a live demonstration, and we know that they can go in whichever direction, but I have faith. So what I'm showing you here is the test platform for one of our first service customers for FOLIO, Simmons University in Boston, in Massachusetts. And I just want to kind of take you for a little bit of a tour of a few of the apps that make up FOLIO and talk about how they work together. So this is the home screen, if you will. This is the last release of, or the last current production release of FOLIO, called Kiwi. They all have names of flowers, running at Simmons University. And in olden times, I would show you how you can actually check out books, because a library management system wouldn't be much use if you can't go and scan a patron's library card and scan some items and check them out. But I will ask you to just take my word for it that actually works. It would have been discovered now by the 50 libraries running it if it didn't work. But it starts and ends ultimately with the basic functions of providing access to materials for library patrons. You can check materials in, check the materials out, you can check them back in. And these functions in this case are provided by what we call apps. So the top navigation bar here shows the most commonly used apps for this particular user. I can see get information about my own user. and I have access to further apps down here. So these are all independent apps that are running on the FOLIO platform that share an infrastructure of APIs that allow them to talk to each other and that share a common look and feel that is implemented through a shared toolkit, a shared UI toolkit that I'll talk more about. But that provides for common navigation so that you walk back and forth between these apps, even though those apps were developed at different times by different development teams, they all have a similar look and feel. They all have identical navigation. They all have a shared model of managing permissions, internationalization, accessibility, mobile friendliness, and so on. So I wanted to back out a little bit further because not everybody realizes that, in fact, the library service platform is really typically used to manage almost all aspects of library operations. Different libraries come at this differently, but it starts really with the ability to acquire and select materials. So there's a set of apps in FOLIO that combine to provide mechanisms to allow for acquisitions and electronic resource management. And one of the things that we realized early on in the development of FOLIO was that we would make a more flexible system if we broke up functionality into smaller bits. So the design paradigm in FOLIO is very much to try to build building blocks, where each building block tends to focus on a really specific function and then it plays together with other functions. So there isn't an acquisitions app for managing the purchasing of materials. There's a set of apps that work together to support that function. And because those apps each have more limited functionality, it makes them easier to extend, to build on. If you want to completely change the behavior of FOLIO in some specific aspect, you can change one app instead of changing the whole system. And that provides for a lot of flexibility. So very quickly, the finance module allows you to deal with fiscal years, to create ledgers, to create budgets, to assign funds to different aspects of your collection building, different things that you want to purchase. And that's the foundation for acquisitions. Not all libraries, again, choose to manage their finances within the library management system, but even for those libraries that use separate financial systems, which is truthfully most of them, there's often in libraries such a wealth of different funds and ways that the budget needs to be broken up into different areas of interest, that having the ability to manage these funds in the library management system is extremely useful. The other aspects that you need to be able to acquire things are organizations or companies to buy them from. So one of the things that we have is there's a generic organizations app that allows you to track and manage all of the relationships with other organizations, whether they are libraries or vendors. But specifically, I can go in and I can look at the vendors that are known to my library, and I can put in contact information. I can put in different types of interfaces that the library makes available, EDI profiles for electronic invoicing and so on, terms that are associated with the relationship with that vendor and so on. I can tie agreements, running agreements for access to content to that organization. The next piece that makes up the ability to add new content is the ability to manage purchase orders. And this allows me to see and to track all of the purchase orders that I'm managing within my library. And those are again tied to obviously to organizations. They're tied to funds. And I can also see if I find a purchase order that is tied to physical materials. A lot of the materials for this particular library and for most libraries are tied to electronic resources. But if I were to look at this particular purchase order, which I believe was for an actual book, I can go in and look at the purchase order line, and ultimately I can tie. Oh, I thought this would be the one that has a tie to, let me try one more, if you'll bear with me. Oh, no, not this one either. Oh, maybe, let's see. And here we go. So here's an actual book purchase, so I can kind of end the journey. In the next app I'll talk about briefly, which is the inventory app, which allows me to see and engage with the actual holdings, the inventory of my library. And this app allows me to kind of see and look at my collection as a whole, to import and export records, to edit metadata and so on. And even for libraries that have chosen to use MARC as their bibliographic formats, to go in and change and modify MARC records. So inventory is again the shared model for the app that provides a picture of the library's holdings that can then be used and plugged into by all the other apps. And it's an example of how these apps kind of play together and support each other ultimately in supporting these workflows, but they do that by working very independently. So the apps that I've shown were largely part of the family of apps that were built alongside the FOLIO platform. They grew out of kind of the initial design. We thought of them when we were building these apps as being kind of like the starter apps that come with an iPhone when you take it home from the store, and that kind of make it a phone, the ability to make calls and send text messages and do navigation and turn the flashlight on and off. These are the core set of apps. But very quickly, we started to see apps being developed by stakeholders, by libraries and organizations that needed something beyond that. And I want to call out a few of these that I think are really interesting. I'm going to start with this one because this is one that we happened to work on very early on, actually with Simmons University and their consortium. There is often a need in libraries to manage the relationship between materials purchased and courses given in the university. So what the course management app allows you to do is to tie a course together with instructors and together with sets of items in the collection. So you can track these in terms of, because often they are physically located in on special shelves near the front of the library where people can come in and either bother for a short time in the library, or if entire class sets are available, they can take it home. You may also feed this information into course management systems outside of the library management platform by various kinds of learning management platforms, or into the discovery system as another way to navigate the collection. So course management systems are really important, or course reserve systems, but there wasn't one in FOLIO in the original design, and it wasn't prioritized by all of the libraries that sat around the table. So one consortium in particular said, we'd like to make this. And so we worked with them to build that app. And it has since been adopted by many other libraries and has been further developed, and integrations have been built with external learning management systems by other libraries. So it was one of the first examples of that really proved the point that FOLIO doesn't have a single roadmap, that there is a shared direction to FOLIO that focuses on the broad and common needs. But FOLIO is really designed to allow anyone to come in and say, I want to resource, I want to make FOLIO do something completely out of left field that we haven't thought about before. Another interesting development that I think is worth calling up is reporting. So there was always an awareness in the community around FOLIO that there was a need for a mechanism for the library to build reports to serve different needs. And early on, though, in the project, EBSCO saw an opportunity, which was very reasonable, to provide a reporting and an analytics tool that would work across all of their different products, would slot into FOLIO and other tools. And that was great. But there was a real sense amongst some in the FOLIO community that there was a need for an open source reporting solution that could be used by everybody, and that might fit into kind of the FOLIO vision. And that people could adapt and grow over time. So ultimately, the need for that became strong enough that we at Index Data decided to fund this development. So we put one of our architects and developers on the task of coming up with an approach to reporting that would suit FOLIO. And it grew eventually into a vision for what comes to be known as the library data platform. So a reporting solution that can be applied not just to FOLIO, but to other projects, and not just to data that originates from within the library management system, but data that might originate from anywhere within the library or within the university. If you wanted, for instance, to combine the activities of the library with learning outcomes or with scholarly activities, the library data platform would potentially provide the means to do that. So it's in a sense, in some respects, it's quite a simple tool, but in other ways, it's very extensible. It's very dynamic and can be applied and used in many different ways. So what it fundamentally does is it supports the gathering of data into essentially a warehouse where current and historical data from FOLIO or from other systems are gathered into an analytics database, and you can interrogate that database in different ways. So there is an app that from the last release of FOLIO has been part of FOLIO, and it allows for a fairly basic way of accessing FOLIO data. So I can show one example of this. If you want to poke ads, let's say the set of organizations. So there's a huge list here, because basically what the library data platform does is it takes all the data that's maintained across all of the different apps in FOLIO, and it gathers them into one database so you can have one single view of it. So let's see, we will grab the name from the organization table and the vendor flag so we can see all of our vendors. And at the bottom here, you see a list of those organizations that are known to this library as vendors. And you can view it here, but typically what you'll do is you will download it in a file and then manipulate it in some other apps. So I can call, if I do this right, I can call this data into a text viewer. And here I have, let's see, is that the right table? Here I have the right table. And from here I can manipulate it in other ways. This is the first release of this app. The next generation of it will allow joins across multiple tables and will allow other types of features. What libraries do, however, and what makes the library data platform exciting is that you can use any tool to provide access to and to make use of this data. So this is one slide of a recent presentation about the library data platform, and it shows you examples of how Cornell Library in the US is using the library data platform to generate Excel files for analysis, as well as visualizations in a tool called a general purpose database tool called Tableau. about different types of loans and operations taking place within the library. So the LDP app or the LDP tool is already used by multiple libraries that are running Folio in production, and it's also been adopted by the Reshare project. And I want to actually change gears now and hop out of Folio and into Reshare, because the Reshare project is in some ways one of the more interesting examples of the ways that the Folio project is dynamic and can grow in unpredictable directions, if you will. So very briefly, the Reshare project began, I think about three and a half years ago now. And it was the result of a group of library consortia, resource sharing consortia, that felt frustrated by the shrinking options for technology to serve their needs. There have been a lot of acquisitions, a lot of products have been bought up by other companies and end of life, killed off essentially. And these consortia wish to do something new. And we came into that having had working relationships with many of these consortia for many years, and said, you know, what if we applied the same model as Folio and the same underlying architecture to the problem of library resource sharing, and build a community of practice around the idea of interlibrary loan and resource sharing? And that became the foundation for the project. One of the consortia invested money to allow us to hire a user experience expert to work with subject matter experts from different libraries, but Index Data invested what amounts to millions of dollars in man hours to build out this product, together with other companies, together with people from libraries. And essentially what we have now is a product that is made up of a set of apps that work together within the Folio platform. So we've essentially taken all of the apps out of Folio that make it a library service platform, and we've produced a new set of apps that can be used independently of Folio to provide resource sharing services, no matter what library management system you use. It will talk to Alma, it will talk to Sierra, Millennium, to all of the different systems out there. And it allows libraries to streamline interlibrary loan services and to manage and track the transactions that go on, the shipping of materials, the interactions with the library management system. And some really interesting things happen when you do this. So you'll see that fundamentally it's the same system, but with a different set of apps, where we got a request app for sending requests to other libraries, a supply app for meeting those requests. And we've got things like, there's a directory that allows you to see and look at all of the members of your consortium. The system is designed to be very open-ended, to allow different consortia to work together and to group each other, and eventually to kind of allow all libraries to do resource sharing using a platform like this, using open standards and open protocols. But you could potentially take this set of apps and you could move them into Folio and use them in conjunction with Folio to essentially have a resource sharing system solution embedded within Folio. But you could also imagine taking certain apps from Folio that might be useful in this context and bringing them in here. And one of the apps that we have brought into the Reshare project is the library data platform. It's not represented here, but it's part of the Reshare project, and it's used to generate reports and analytics for consortial resource sharing for the libraries that are using it. So it's an example of how we're getting this economy of this platform economy, in the sense that things that are built on the Folio platform can potentially benefit everybody. The Reshare project draws new funding, new resources, new interest to the Folio platform, but we're also building apps that can potentially run right alongside the other apps in Folio. And we have a project that can potentially benefit from all the work that's been done in FOLIO. So between the library data platform and the course reserve system and reshare, I hope what you start to see is the shape of what we were envisaging as an ecosystem, a true ecosystem, in the sense of a community of different organisms, different organizations, different types of entities that are working in the same space, fulfilling very different roles within that ecosystem, but ultimately supporting each other. Even if some of them don't know each other, some of them they're not necessarily coordinating or working together, but they are all working towards the same end of serving libraries and library patron needs. And because they are sharing a platform, we get a number of opportunities for added value by combining these different efforts together, by integrating them, by having them talk together. And it really has that the community, in a sense, really helps serve that role of breaking down boundaries. So I'm going to stop the demo part and see if I can find my way back to my slides, because I want to spend a little bit of time talking to you about the architecture that has made this possible, and also some of the structure of the community and how I feel that structure tries to meet that need that we talked about early on for breaking down silos and enabling an ongoing conversation between strategic vision and software development. So this is a very high-level sketch of the FOLIO architecture. What you have seen so far is a set of apps in FOLIO and reshare that work together. Those apps have a common look and feel. They have shared navigation, accessibility, and all that good stuff, due to the fact that they are all using a shared toolkit. So they are all web apps, primarily built in JavaScript. But because they all use a shared toolkit for communication and for rendering the UI, they all look the same and they can all kind of talk to each other. We call that toolkit stripes. Each of those apps is potentially based on back-end logic that sits on the server side and provides business logic and storage and functionality. So each app is talking through APIs to different, to a back-end module, or to more than one back-end module. All of that traffic is facilitated and controlled by a piece of software that we call Okapi. Okapi is an animal with stripes, and that's why we call the UI toolkit stripes, because they're the stripes of the Okapi. Okapi also stands for OK API, which is kind of because Okapi plays the role of an API gateway in this framework. So each of these backend modules is what's called a microservice, in the sense that they are all independent in how they manage and store data. There's not an assumption of a single database that is shared across the board by all these different modules. The reason for that is we wanted developers to have as much freedom as possible in terms of how they go about implementing their backends. In terms of concrete hosting, the backends are put into what's called containers, and are typically hosted in Amazon Web Service, but they can easily be hosted locally as well. There are lots of open source tools for managing clouds of these containers in a local system. The backend modules can communicate with each other through APIs, as well as with their front ends. And again, all of that traffic is managed by Okapi. And Okapi does some really important things in this. A critical thing that Okapi does is it manages access control and permissions, both for users, so that a user only can can only go in and say delete something out of inventory if he has permission to do it. The user can only go in and manipulate the funds or the budgets of a library if he or she has permissions to do that. And it also manages access to these backend APIs when modules call each other, when you want to call these backends from outside. So you can assign permissions to say, hey, I want this app to be able to talk to this other app, or I want to expose the API of this particular app to the outside because I want to build an integration with some external system. I may want, in the case of Chicago, there was work done to build an integration between FOLIO and the robotic high-density storage system in the basement of the University of Chicago. And they use these APIs to make that happen. So this is essentially, in a nutshell, how the FOLIO architecture works. It's a set of apps. Those apps are in turn made up of UI modules that talk to backend modules, and backend modules that talk to other backend modules, some of which provides storage functionality, some of which provide business logic. But it's ultimately, it's a very simple architecture. And that was a key part of the design. We wanted something that was not heavy. We wanted something that was not opinionated in terms of how people work. So people can build their backend modules in all kinds of different tools and development environments and programming languages. All they have to do is to support web service APIs. And they have to declare what APIs they make available and what APIs they need access to. And what that allows Okapi to do is to manage kind of dependencies and needs across the whole platform. So in fact, if I briefly hop back to the the demonstration, excuse me. If I look at these different apps in the bottom, I'm going to look at the settings app. This provides a shared location where I can manage settings for all of these apps. Some of them are quite simple. Some of them are quite complicated. Managing circulation, for instance, involves things like loan rules and policies and so on. But my favorite settings function is I can go way down at the bottom here and I can look at software versions. And this will tell me all of the apps and modules that make up this particular instance of FOLIO. And again, any given library may run a different set of apps. And that may change over time. They may only run a really small set, or they may run a combination of all the apps plus all kinds of custom apps. Excuse me. But all of that can be seen here. And what's really kind of interesting is that all of these apps and the modules in the backend all support APIs. And FOLIO is really made up of the totality of all of the different APIs implemented by all these different modules. And because those APIs are defined using machine-readable definitions in terms of what APIs each module makes available and what APIs it consumes, it becomes very easy to document the total set of functions that are available to developers as well. So if I hop into the dev website and I look at the reference page, I can go in and look at the API documentation. And if I were to browse down, and this shows me kind of all the different categories of modules that are part of FOLIO, that are part of the Flower releases. If I look at course reserves, I can see all of the APIs that are made available on the back ends of FOLIO. And for each of those, I can go in here and I can click and I can see what functions and services are available, what permissions are needed. I can see example records, and I can see often referenced definitions of how that API is used. So in a sense, FOLIO's architecture provides a means of automatically generating the documentation for all of these APIs, but it also kind of proves one of the central tenets of the Folio architecture is that Folio is APIs all the way down. There's not a commercial company that decides what APIs are made available to whom. In a lot of cases, in commercial systems, in libraries and outside of libraries, APIs are things that are owned by the platform owner. They're not owned, they're not treated by many vendors as something that is owned by you, the library. And platform owners can use those API, can by controlling who gets access and what people can use those APIs for. Vendors can control their business. They can prevent competitors from emerging, or they can set up business relationships and demand money, essentially, be gatekeepers of, because they are gatekeepers of these APIs that form the access points for the data that really truly belongs to the library. The philosophy of Folio is fundamentally that those APIs belong to the community and access belongs to the individual library. So everything in Folio that you see in the user interface is based on those APIs in the back end. And those APIs in the back end are as available to you and to your developers and to the companies you want to partner with as they are available to the interface. That is a central core part of the idea behind Folio. And one which I think is just really healthy in the sense of democratizing or defining this ecosystem that we want to have that allows for collaboration across all of these different organizations. So I want to talk a little bit here at the end about the community organization, or the way that we've tried to structure the community. And again, as I said, the community is truly an ecosystem, right? So there are people using Folio that don't take part in this conversation. That's fine. There are people who come in and they are companion projects like Reshare that have their own community organization that have entirely different structures for working together. But this is how Folio is structured, and I think it's a really interesting model for how to organize a conversation about technology in a way that breaks down barriers. And I think it's interesting to note that this model not only has kind of guided the development of Folio, it was also a starting point that was used when Project Reshare began, and that has been used to form kind of the seed for that community. And there is a similar conversation going on, in particular in Germany, in Europe, where Folio was adopted very early on, and where there's a really rich community, where there is, in a sense, a parallel Folio community of libraries working together and funding developments together and sharing resources together. So I see this not just as a structure that is used in Folio, but kind of a new approach to talking about and managing software roadmaps in a collaborative way across organizational boundaries. I think of it as open product management. And I feel that in some ways, it's maybe one of the more important innovations of the Folio project, because it goes beyond just saying, hey, yeah, this is open source software and we are co-investing, we're collaborating, to saying we have a real model for working together. I'm sorry, was that a comment or question? No.
No, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
So there are two dimensions to the community organization, or in this way of looking at it. There's a horizontal and a vertical dimension. The horizontal dimension is the idea of organizations engaging in open collaboration, that we are co-investing in the creation of shared value. This is fundamentally different than the types of working relationships that take place in the conventional product management, where a company builds a product as equity and then they sell services to fund the development of that product. In this open model of collaboration, we co-own the equity in the sense that everybody can take it, pick it up, and own and develop it. It is an open source license that doesn't hold any rights back from people who come to it from the outside. So everybody has ownership, and there's value in joining the shared conversation about where that shared equity is moving. So it's a model of collaborative product management that spans the boundaries of libraries and organizations, but also it spans the boundaries of types of organizations. So EBSCO as a service provider, Index Data as a service provider sit at the same table as academic libraries and consortia, and we talk about strategic challenges and goals and ambitions and funding and resourcing together. So we really own the roadmap of that product together in a very real sense that is very difficult to replicate in a conventional commercial model where somebody is selling a service based on monopoly ownership of the product. There's still money changing hands. There are companies that provides hosting and services, custom development and otherwise, but those services are provided within a framework of common ownership of the infrastructure. One of the things that's been done to facilitate this is that the intellectual property that we are all working from is held by a neutral entity. In this case, by a nonprofit organization called the Open Library Foundation that was created for this purpose. So FOLIO can never be bought. It's never going to be acquired by private equity or by a larger company. Even if any one of the companies that sit around the table might be bought out tomorrow, it will not change FOLIO. FOLIO will continue to belong to everybody. Sustainability is implementing through shared ongoing contributions, right? By some of us, we provide hosting services. Some of us provide development. Some of us provide support. It's an open ecosystem made up of businesses and consumers and different types of organizations. So that's the horizontal component of all this, if you will. The vertical component is equally important. Going back to that earlier discussion about trying to realize or to figure out how to crack the problem of realizing innovation in technology, figuring out how you build technology that's not only relevant today, but also in 3 or 4 or 5 years when the technology is actually done. How do you realize that? And one of our theses has been that you need to realize that by having a constant ongoing dialogue between strategic leadership and technical leadership and development. So within FOLIO, ultimately the product, the shared equity, is managed by a conversation that starts with strategic leadership that's provided by a community council. This was really originally made up by the stakeholders that had come to the table originally, but today it's an elected group, elected from the FOLIO community with limited terms. And again, they set direction. They think about where the FOLIO community fits into the larger landscape of libraries, how the resource work, and so on. The product council owns the roadmap, sets high-level priorities, and talks about resourcing. There are multiple special interest groups made up of subject matter experts that work together every day to think about functional requirements and work through interface designs, and that ultimately generates the backlog and the granular priorities for the development teams. The developers are organized into teams typically. Some of them come from different companies that are participating in FOLIO. Some of them come from the libraries, and some of them are teams that are made up of combinations of contributed resources from different organizations. So part of the way that people invest in FOLIO is by volunteering staff time to these shared conversations in the different councils, and partly how people contribute is to make developers available to do this work. And to be fair and realistically, you may see more developers coming from commercial companies that have traditionally have resources for doing development. But I think it's been really exciting as well to see some key pieces of functionality contributed and built by libraries originating from libraries. And all of this is both very dynamic in the sense that it evolves over time. But again, this is not the entirety of the FOLIO community. There are efforts going around outside of this circle by libraries that are using the platform to their own ends, that are building apps that they find necessary. But this structure has provided a really powerful engine for us to kind of manage a common core, kind of center of gravity to the FOLIO projects. So to kind of wrap up, again, I just to rehash or reassert the idea that there are many pathways to engagement for different types of organizations. We've seen a really exciting level of kind of local organization in Germany. There's a ton of work going on in China that unfortunately the rest of us are not seeing so much of that work coming out. But China, the Shanghai Public Library is using FOLIO to run their libraries. Project Reshare was formed as a companion community, essentially using the same platform and inspired by the same community model to implement into library loan functionality. And we have been building an index data, custom apps together with many different partners and stakeholders at this point. So what we aim to do in conclusion was really to try to disrupt what felt like a marketplace, a commercial marketplace that was collapsing, that was becoming essentially increasingly kind of dominated by technology and commercial monopolies. I'd like to think that model of disrupting the trend towards platforms that own entire spaces, that model could be applied in other places. I'd love to see one day libraries or universities working together to tackle scholarly communication or research data management or research workflows, areas where I think that there's a real threat of a very, very small number of entities owning a huge part of the way that our constituents, researchers, and students are working together. I think that what we've shown with FOLIO is that a collaborative model is perhaps one of the few practical answers to that threat of monopolization. And I'd love to see that applied in other spaces. And again, it offers lots of different ways of engaging. So think about perhaps what it might look like to have more of a community around FOLIO in India that spans different libraries, different types of stakeholders, engaging with different communities around the world, but using your unique abilities and your unique perspective to bring something to the global community around this. And that's the end of what I have to say.